If you could get coaching from a leader who has spent time with over 35,000 CEOs, wouldn't that be worth it? Today's guest will do just that for you. Welcome to Decision Points. I'm Doug Hudson.
I'm Scott Wood.
And welcome Sean Magennis.
Thank you for having me.
Rhymes with Guinness.
That's right. A good Irish beer.
That's right.
Must be drunk cold, though, Doug. Not warm
you
like the Irish
and the Brits do
it.
You drink it, so you don't drink it warm.
No, I drink it as cold as it possibly
But you do drink it.
Yes, I do.
I think I've had one sip of a dark Guinness beer one time in my life.
You have?
Yeah, but that's it. One sip, because I just can't do the dark.
You know, my dad would always have a couple of bottles in the refrigerator, and I'm sure at some point I must have got into it as a teenager. So I have...
Like you're sure, or like you remember the day, sure.
Well, maybe the day. But he definitely was responsible for having it accessible, for sure.
I love that. Your dad's responsible for having it accessible.
Absolutely.
For your early age sipping of beer. Where are you from?
South Africa.
South Africa.
Born and raised.
Yeah.
Yeah, in Johannesburg born, but grew up in a little city town called Durban.
Okay.
On the Indian Ocean.
Okay.
And
sounds beautiful.
it is beautiful, very tropical.
Yeah.
So it was known as the sort of banana state. So they, a lot of banana, a lot of sugarcane, that type of thing. Went to boarding school at the age of 7, just outside of Durban, which is quite the experience. We may get into that.
Well, let's get into it for a minute right now. At 7.
7 years old, yeah.
Was that common? Was your family raised that way? Like, did your mom or dad? Was that common in your community?
Common.
I mean, sometimes in the Northeast here, that can be more common. But that's
It was common in their sort of community. The business entrepreneur. Both my parents were entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
For their sort of circle of friends. Usually in high school, though, you'd go for your last 3 or 4 years.
Right.
My folks got divorced, and so it sort of propelled, accelerated that
process,
boarding school deal. But it was a good experience after. In hindsight, maybe not the first couple of years.
I gotta push in there for a minute though, Sean. I mean, what memories do you have at age 7, 8, 9 years old? What memories do you have?
Strong memories. We were a very tight family. So I have 2 siblings, older sister, younger brother.
Okay. Folks
very involved with us. Very passionate people. As an aside, they got divorced and married to each other 3 times. 3 times. And my mother was a staunch Catholic.
Remarried.
Yes.
Divorced, remarried.
Yes.
And where are they
divorced.
living today?
Both of them deceased.
Both of them deceased.
Yeah, both of them
Were they
deceased.
married when they died?
No.
Okay, so
they were married for 23 years.
Wow.
And then, my dad was at my mom's funeral, which was really interesting. They had this, I think if they could have cleared up some of the competitiveness in their personalities, would have been a great relationship. But, testament to them, they both had a massive commitment to their kids. Mm-hmm. And so they put their kids first and their relationship and their issues second.
Coach us up. I mean, that's anyone listening to this. I mean, relationships is really the, many ways, essence of life. How would you alluded to it. What's a coaching principle doing your parents' marriage?
It's such a great question, and I've spoken to a lot of divorced kids and kids from divorced homes. Yeah. Try to speak to them, particularly the ones that are younger. It really isn't their fault, the child's fault. And so from a parental perspective, though, the damage, unless the parents really understand that, trashing one or the other to their kids has such a detrimental effect, they don't see the damage that gets done. And so, both counseling parents as well as children, it's 2 different modalities, it's 2 different coping mechanisms, but it's so critical. And, today sometimes relationships don't work. I'm kind of old school. My belief was, and it's why I took a little bit longer to get married. I got married when I was 34. For me, it was very important that if I made that decision, my partner and I, my spouse and I, had a commitment to a long-term relationship, and we spoke about that in advance of getting married. And I didn't want to go down the path that my parents went down, or put potentially one of my children or a child into that position. Anyway, you learn those things.
Man, I could spend, because I think it's so interesting. There was so much love and some respect, I guess, between your mom and dad that they kept trying, but for whatever reason, it
Kind of oil and water.
yeah, exactly. All right, so you go to boarding school. What are some of those distinct memories? Because that's
So
intense as a 7-year-old.
So my best friend, his name is Grant Treble, he and I arrived within an hour of each other, and we ended up in the same dormitory. Now, we were picture a Victorian wooden iron building with, wide plank flooring. You get a lot of splinters as a kid, running and sliding on those floors, highly polished, but, steel mesh and concrete walls, sort of, you'd call it stucco. Today, but very basic.
Yep.
Little bed, little iron bed, and a little wooden, and I like this little table here, a little wooden table. And Grant was sleeping right next to me, the bed next to me. And he was a big guy for his age.
But he's 7 years old too.
7 years old, but he was big. And he was large, he was a little chunky, and quite confident. I had just gone through this, trauma of a divorce. So I was a little teary. And he kind of just, at 7 years old, parents left, everybody disappeared. We were sitting in the dorm together. He put his arm around me. It was a remarkable experience at that young age. And that relationship has stood the test of time.
That's amazing.
And so the lesson for me in that, well, not the lesson, but the realization is that you're not alone, was very profound. And,
Wow.
And he helped me a lot in the early stages. I've been able to repay the favor, not in order to, but just as a result of the connection.
Any relationship, whether it's marriage, whether it's work, there's a yin and yang of who's up or down. Grant still living?
He's still living.
Where's Grant today?
He's in South Africa. We speak regularly. We do Zooms. He came to my wedding in Mexico when I got married in 99. And I see him when I go to South Africa. He's the first person typically that I see. And even if I'm not going home to Durban, he will come to Cape Town or he'll come and meet me. The consistency of that, I will say that, some of the things that I've learned along the way are, if you've got, and I have a lot of acquaintances, but I have a small group of friends.
Yep.
The consistency in that for me has been vital. Because having somebody that knows you intimately, and we've got a lot of friends, Scott and I here in Dallas, and probably you have too, that we've known for many years. That consistency gives you the opportunity to sort of grow and learn and develop with people that just love you or regard you highly. And that to me was a mainstay. It was a lifesaver in many instances, by the way.
So, Sean, what I heard you say there is that at an early age, 7 years old, in that dorm room with Grant, you got the overwhelming understanding that you were not alone.
Correct.
I got to go right there. We speak to CEOs and entrepreneurs every day. Scott's talked to a lot. I've talked to a lot. Maybe there's few people in the world who have talked to as many CEOs. So many people, so many of them feel alone. How do they get there? How do they get themselves out of that?
Yeah, I think, it's interesting. Going back to Grant, both of us developed walls, defenses, and you had to. I have some of the best defenses known to mankind. When you're left alone at 7, and you're the baby, and you've got all these bullies, and you've got everything that comes at you.
What's your 1, 2, or 3 best defenses?
So, run like hell,
Run fast,
and you learn that the hard way. Keep your nose clean. Keep your nose out of other people's business, because if you can engage without being overly visible. The kids that got a lot of flack were those that would wear either their emotions on their sleeves, or they'd be needy, or they'd be overly emotional. Now that becomes a detriment later in life, because those defenses are really there to protect the fear factor that's inside. And a lot of CEOs that I know, there's the imposter syndrome, which everybody talks about, and I'm sure your guests have spoken about. I had that imposter syndrome, and I was able to overcome that at various stages. But there were times in my life, particularly when I was starting as an entrepreneur, where I had to pretend to be confident with the full knowledge that I was I had a story that I told myself that I was too young. And I started my first business when I was 26, and that was in Canada. I left South Africa, went to Canada. So imagine, having the experience of you've got your network in your hometown, but then you leave and you go thousands of miles away and you don't know anybody. So you have, I learned to be very good at projecting confidence, but I would go home sometimes of an evening and go, how am I going to deliver what I just promised? And I was very fortunate that at times when I was at my most vulnerable and I would say faking it in terms of confidence, people would arrive and they would give me they would mentor me, or I would have conversations with individuals that I respected, and I learned to accept that I didn't know everything, and that was okay. But you have to project, as a leader, and this is what I see in a lot of leaders, the balance between the need to project confidence and the power of vulnerability. There's a paradox there. And how do you put those two together so that you're functional, you're authentic, believable, and you can still deal with the fact that not many people are in the same boat as you are? Does that make sense?
Coach us up. Do you agree or disagree with the cliche, fake it till you make it?
I'm nearly 60, and I would now disagree with that cliche.
You disagree with it?
Yeah.
Why?
I'll talk to the 26-year CEO. So I emigrated to Canada, living in Toronto, and I attended Mass at the Newman Centre at the University of Toronto. And I was pitching Kelly Services, which was one of the largest temporary placement companies in the world, phenomenal business, Kelly Green, and their Canadian Chief Human Resources Officer happened to be sitting in Mass that day, and we were having coffee afterwards. And what I didn't know at the time was that he was a Catholic priest and he was on a sabbatical. The church let him take a sabbatical, but he was heading up all of human resources for Canada.
Very cool, actually.
And I told him what I was doing, and I was sort of selling a little bit. And he said, well, why don't you come and meet me and my team on Monday morning? Put on my suit or go down to their head office. And this was, glitz and glamour and, very professional office environment. He said, okay, tell us about it. I was selling psychometric tests. So math, reasoning, working memory, behavioral tests. And they really liked the product. But at that age, I was very much an agenda-based salesperson. I was in my head.
Yep.
And
go through the checklist.
I had a target. And
I think we all were at like 26.
At 26.
That's right. Yep.
So finished the hour and a half presentation. They really liked it. They said, please submit a proposal. John called me up that afternoon about 4:00, and he said, why don't you come and have a coffee with me tomorrow? And he sat me down and he said to me, you strike me as a really good young guy. He said, you don't have to pretend to be anybody that you're not. You've got a great product. You're very, believable. You're passionate about what you do. And that was the first of many points along my career to date where somebody has, as I said to you, somebody has sort of arrived on the scene. It's almost like providence in a way.
Yep.
And we had a 14-year relationship, and that account turned into multi millions of dollars over that 14-year period. We traveled extensively together. He ended up going back to the church, ended up in Houston running a large private Catholic school, and I'll never forget it. Never forget the lesson. Now, did I immediately learn from that lesson? No, it took time.
That's right. Yep.
It took time.
Yep.
And it took a couple of knocks along the way to really get it into my head that if I was just myself and I did the right things, and showed up authentically, that good things happened.
Are you in boarding school in South Africa all the way through high school?
Last 2 years, I convinced my mom. My brother and I had worked on my mother for a long time to stay at home for the last 2 years. So
Okay.
it was a crazy 2
Yeah.
years because when
That's
you're
when you drank the Guinness.
more than Guinness. That's when we had a good time. We were very privileged growing up in South Africa, and our whole family was very sports oriented. We played everything.
Yep.
My brother and I were on every team. We lived right on the ocean, so we were in the ocean at least 3-4 times
Can you
a
surf?
week. My brother's the surfer. I was a boogie boarder. I'm
Okay,
6
yeah,
foot.
yeah,
I'm
yeah,
6'2", and I struggled to stand up on these little short surfboards that were very popular in South Africa.
I have been looking for an excuse of why I can't surf.
But you're not 6'2".
No, I think the 6 foot and above is hard.
Okay.
It's more difficult.
Okay, is that
so?
what?
I'll boogie board with you. He can surf, and this is
So we had an idol that lived 4 doors down from us. His name was Michael Thompson. His first cousin, Sean Thompson, was a world champion surfer.
Oh wow!
The famous world champion surfer.
Cool.
If your audience knows Sean Thompson, he's
You know
a
that
great
name?
guy.
I don't. But
Lives in Santa Barbara now.
Oh, does he?
Amazing
So how
human
old
being.
Sean be?
Sean would be mid-60s, I
that's
would
awesome.
think.
Yeah,
Mid-60s,
yeah.
but he still surfs. And
I'll do a little deep dive on Sean. I know you will as well.
very special guy. Yeah.
Very cool. So you attend the local high school.
Local high school, government
there.
high school.
Yep. So then what happens after high school?
I was conscripted into the army.
Okay.
So I did in South Africa during that time, still during apartheid, which was horrendous. But every white male had to serve a minimum of 2 years full time, and then a 10 to 15 year commitment after that in the equivalent of the National Guard.
Yeah.
So I got called up to the engineers, to the sappers, for mine sweeping. And I did not like the idea of sweeping mines. So
No,
2
doesn't
weeks
sound-
in,
yeah.
basically you arrive at the train station, you go in the middle of nowhere and you go to boot camp. So during boot camp, they had a group of, special services come around and pitch you on coming and joining their units. And one of those was a specialized infantry battalion called One Reconnaissance, and there was a very good-looking guy with a maroon beret and wings and muscles, and put up a video presentation of all the things that you can do if you joined their battalion. So
Marketing.
but you had to. But he said, there was maybe 500 people in this auditorium. And everybody just wanted to get the hell out of there. And they asked a series of questions. You raised your hand, they whittled you down. Eventually, there was about 20 guys that said, we're really interested. And then they said, okay, go and get your PT kit on, your shorts and T-shirt and your running shoes. And we did a 15-kilometer run. You had to do it in a certain amount of time. You had to pick up one of your buddies and carry them across a football field twice in a certain amount of time. You had to do push-ups, sit-ups, do a little obstacle. It took a day. So this was early in the morning, and then they put you through your paces, and at the end of the day, you're absolutely exhausted.
Yep.
Then they get you to do a bunch of tests.
Yep. When you're
psychology,
tired.
when you're tired. And then they interview. A couple of these guys sit there and interview you. So at the end of that whole scenario, it was about 8 o'clock at night, and I got a tap on the shoulder, and they said, okay, you've been selected. There was one other from that engineering group, put us in a covered truck, and literally closed the flap of the truck. You will not get out of this truck. You probably got an 8-hour drive. We had no idea where we were going.
No way.
Yeah, and we ended up in this at this base camp with about 100 guys from around the country that had gone through a similar thing, and then that's where I did my boot camp.
So many analogies. We don't have time in the military and how the process is trained. They test you when you're tired. It always seems like they're constantly a stress test. How do you handle difficult, which again, we know there's a lot of coaches, ex-military in the corporate, you have a plan, but what happens when you get punched? And I just hear your story, and you're having to trust the process. You're having to trust the system. But what are takeaways from your military? How long did you serve then?
2 years full time, and then I served every year for 3 months a year, right up until I left to go to Canada.
Okay. How many years was that? Just
So that
on the
was
timeline?
another 5 years.
Okay.
Wow. Yeah. What are
7 years.
takeaways? Decision points, obviously, is what
Yeah.
What are the things that you're learning from that, Sean, and that you can transfer to business?
So the greatest one was the capacity of the mind and the body to handle stress is unbelievable. The human brain and the body are built to handle stress. As long as you're feeding and caring for it and you're maintaining the body and the mind, it is remarkable. I mean, the stress, the abuse, both physical and mental that you get put under, particularly for us in the first sort of 6 to 12 months, because you're going to go into combat. You're going to go, this unit was designed so that small groups of people would go, thousands of miles into enemy territory, do observation, sometimes have to get themselves out without, being rescued. So you had to be mentally very, very strong. You also had to learn to collaborate with people that you may not associate with outside of that particular instance. So, I have good friends, from those military days, but these were not people that you selected to be friends with.
Right.
You were put together.
Yep,
So
yep.
think of the context of a work environment or a project team, where you're not going to go necessarily and have a beer with them afterwards or have a pizza or, go to church with them on Sunday. But you're put there to do a very important task. And if you don't do it well, one of you is going to die. Now, in business, that isn't normally the case, but in certain businesses it is. If you're a cardiologist or you're a open heart surgeon, you're heavily reliant on your team. So for me, I was always in sports, team sports, etc. So I knew the value of a team, but it didn't really, that was fun and you were competing. In the military, they really weed out those that are non-team players and those that are team players. And they also get you to understand the chain of command, not to subjugate your ability to determine right from wrong, but they stress test you to make sure that in the event you see something, you actually say, hey, there's something bad coming around the corner.
Yeah.
We've got to get this done. And also when you fail, and failing in the sense of if you physically are weakened, there's always somebody that's stronger who can help you, who can carry your pack, who can for a short period of time step up and take ownership. So those things were, for me, they were extraordinary. And I was able to take a lot of those lessons into my businesses, particularly when it comes to delegation. Because as a leader, yes, you lead. Typically, you have the passion. You're the visionary, but you cannot walk this life alone. And that's a lesson throughout my whole life. The moment I decided to do something on my own was usually where it was suboptimal, and it didn't work, or I didn't take the advice of a collective group of people.
Take a minute, Sean, this is incredible. Take a minute and coach up leaders on good delegation, poor delegation, what delegation means, what it doesn't mean. We use a system here at True North called EOS.
Yeah, it's fantastic.
Delegate and elevate. I think that can be, I like the phrase, but it can be abused as well. Coach us up on delegation.
So for me, it starts with really clarity of understanding roles and responsibilities. So when you start with a fundamental understanding of what your responsibilities are, what you're accountable for, who you need to consult with. There's a concept called RACI. I don't know if you've heard of that.
No.
Responsible, Accounted, Consultant, Informed. And it works beautifully.
Responsibility,
Accountability, consultative,
Consultative.
and informed. So in a delegation perspective, you've got to, from the outset, whatever role you're in, your primary accountabilities are the things that you're responsible for doing every day in order to be successful at your role. That's your basic accountability. Your boss has ultimate responsibility for making sure that, they're clearing the way, they're providing the resources. That's the responsible. But the accountable is you're doing X every day. So understanding what that is for every role in the organization is pivotal, because then as soon as somebody is out of whack with what they've said they're going to do or what you require them to do, that becomes very obvious to everybody. If they're not putting up their hand when they don't know what they're doing and saying, hey, I need help.
Yep.
Or where do I go? If you're working a CEO working with a CFO and they're only talking once a month, And, the core essence of any successful business is your ability to run it financially well. You've got to be able to know, a CEO needs to know a little bit about a lot in their particular lane, really, really good, depending on the type of business in the industry, and then have faith that the system they put in place is going to make sure that there are, one, very clear objectives in communication, and then as soon as there's a gap, you know what that gap is and you can come in and fix it. Now, it may be a competency gap, but it usually isn't competency. If you've hired well and you've used a good hiring system, it could be motivation. It could be there's something else going on in the life of that individual. And if you're not communicating with them, you don't know. So any manager and leader, if they're not spending time with their people, and I mean FaceTime, I don't mean Zoom time. And we're living in that world. Now, Zoom is very effective. But FaceTime, in order to build those nuances, very important. So those are, if you're a young leader, get trained. Go and spend time with individuals that are really good delegators. Go and sit and model with somebody that you respect. If you join an organization like EO or YPO or any of these kind of Vistage peer groups, the opportunity to see how other people operate, you're going to do it your way at the end of the day.
Well said.
But it's, Brand Steigen has this. It's more informed. It's like game filming, which is a Steigen concept. It's watching and learning and then practice. There's nothing like practice for delegation. Because scale requires you to build more people probably, and more, maybe it's finance. Maybe, you may be in a business where you only need 10 people, but those 10 people are probably much more important and vital to the success of a business than if you're running a business with 1,000 people where you've got some give and take, some fluff that you can manage.
Sean, speak to, you've probably observed this. I mean, I have, and I've even, it's probably been in my DNA too, but speak to, the entrepreneur who's the heroic individual who's got all the answers. And, a lot of entrepreneurs are wired that way because, that's why they're entrepreneurs. That's why they're
feel
visionaries.
like they have to have all the answers.
Yes. And so it becomes a very individualistic pursuit. And there's an inability or lack of ability or lack of awareness to delegate down into the team and utilize the team to leverage the whole organization.
It's a brilliant observation and question. I have seen so many really gifted CEOs, entrepreneurs, hit a ceiling of complexity where they can't get out of their own way. And unfortunately, a lot of them, their businesses plateau and they start to decline. Because they run out of steam at the end of the day.
Yeah, because they can't do it all.
They can't do it all. And then it becomes about, I'm always right. Their cultures are toxic. So when going into an organization, and I spend a lot of time, as you know, with CEOs of all different persuasions, all different companies, and I become pretty good at identifying toxic environments. And it usually is where somebody has heroically built a business and they've done well. They've got all the financial trappings, but you start to interview the people 2-3 levels down, and you start to see that they've probably surrounded themselves with 1 or 2 people that are complete yes men or yes women who have subjugated all reality to, wipe your
tell the
friend
boss
about,
he or she's right.
and so they don't get feedback. And they don't get
constructive feedback.
They don't get truthful feedback.
Well, that's a better word.
They get feedback. They get complete compliance, which says to them, it's okay. I'm doing the right things.
It's self-reinforcing too. Yeah.
Now, if they hit the wall and they have a wake-up call, I've seen many of them that are able to move out of that, and this is where a system like EOS is so valuable. They may be built to be an integrator. And they're not a visionary. They integrated because they were really good. Maybe they were a CPA, maybe they were an engineer. They built something, they designed a product, but they just didn't have the people skills. They didn't have the ability to go and raise capital. They were lousy at relationships with their bankers. So I've seen it where they start to get the sense, because their business isn't growing, something's wrong. They go and get a coach, which is phenomenal. And if they can crack that, if they can get an opening and really reflect. 360s are fantastic for this, by the way.
What's 360?
360-degree survey is where the individual gets 5 or 10 people that are close to them or know them or
The
work with them.
CEO or owner.
CEO owner gets somebody giving them anonymous feedback on how they show up, how they delegate, what sort of person they are, what sort of culture they're doing. If that CEO is open to receiving that document, it often has a catalyzing effect to have a breakthrough. Now, some people just don't have breakthroughs ever. And by the way, I've realized, and I'm very cool with that's your deal, because, in life, it's very hard to take on the responsibility of fixing someone.
Ultimately, we really can't fix anybody. You can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink.
Cajole.
I want to piggyback here what Scott's asked. I think this is critical to our CEOs, either now or future CEOs and owners. If a listener, someone viewing the Decision Points, if they're wondering, thinking, spend enough seconds in the mirror that maybe they can't get out of their own way, or maybe they've become part of the problem, what are some practical things he or she can do to move past that?
Very often it could require some counseling. It could require having a confidential, deep conversation with a professional, a psychologist, a business psychologist, somebody that they're not fearful of, that the information that they share or the concerns that they share are not going to be spread more broadly. Because a lot of people, in my experience, that fit that mold have perfected the art of self-belief, and they're very concerned about image, and they don't want to show any weakness. So if they can sit down with somebody, that could be very helpful. The 360, as I said, is incredible because it's anonymous. They and it needs to be anonymous.
Coach me up there, because you said it. Maybe I'm missing. Is 360 a program or
it's a questionnaire? And basically, you would go through things like, how do you show up as a leader? Are you an
I'm a
autocrat?
CEO, and I send this
Out
to 5 people,
5,
10
10,
people.
however many people you
I
send
choose
it
them,
to.
obviously.
And it could be. I mean, it could probably, it's not your wife, but it could be someone in
be
your
a spouse.
personal life,
Correct.
Yeah,
right?
so-
Like as much as business. So you're getting feedback from a lot of different people in your circle.
Right. So coach me. I'm the CEO, I'm the owner. I can't just send it to my top 2 lieutenants, right?
You can.
I can. I'm not going to get anything effective.
You may not get anything effective.
So I need people who know me, but people who are willing to tell me the truth.
Correct. And because it's anonymous, and by the way,
So I know the 10 people I'm sending to, but I'm not going to know who's...
you're not going to know the answers. And what they do is the system, usually there's a software system behind, and they aggregate and you can get the verbatims. But when you sit down, this would be done on me every year at YPO. So I had 8 divisions, 8 YPO members that were responsible for each of the committees, and I would have a 360 done. I didn't know who was giving me the feedback. I could suspect from a couple
These
of
are 8
things.
business owners who are hard charging and like they're going to give it to you straight.
It was a time of the year where I would be eagerly anticipating it, but I would be nervous.
Yeah.
Because as a leader, you spend all your time, most of your time, leading and solving problems and making decisions, good, bad, middle of the road decisions. So the practice of getting feedback is so powerful because it grounds you. Mm-hmm. I've seen situations, and this is where board of advisors or board of directors becomes so important in a leadership journey. And the sooner you could get 2 or 3 outside directors or a group of people, or join, EO or YPO, a group like Tiger 21, where you can get some feedback. The beauty of that is it keeps you grounded. Because we all know very successful people that have built multi-billion-dollar companies. And even some people that are, that have a $5 or $10 million business. It's tough. It's tough to be an entrepreneur and to build a business.
It is.
And it's getting even more difficult because competition has gone crazy, legalities in different parts of the world, and it's just tough.
Yep, a lot of pressure.
So keeping grounded, particularly in the face of success, it's almost I almost say if I'm coaching a CEO, it's a non-negotiable in my practice methodology that you're gonna get feedback. Because if you're not, I'm not going to coach you.
Yeah. Why am I even here? 'Cause
Why am I
I'm not going
here?
to be a yes person. I find this to be the opposite of how we started this conversation. It's the opposite of running. Truthful feedback is the opposite of running. Let's move into your career. Like, obviously, we've been talking a lot about your wisdom from your career, but you moved to kind of after military. In some way, Sean, lead us up to you being CEO of YPO. Kind of steps up to that.
Quick steps, and in the words of my friends at CEO Coaching, I'll try and be clear, concise, and compelling. By the way, good things for a leader.
Say those one more time.
Clear, concise, and compelling.
Those 3 C's, track on those.
The last thing you want to do is listen to a leader pontificate, because your team just glazes over.
Yes.
So
Worse than that, they side chatter.
side chatter,
Yes,
side conversations.
He or she is pontificating. It's miserable.
Did a Bachelor of Arts degree in industrial sociology and English and psychology, thinking I was going to be a psychologist. A very good friend of mine's dad was a successful entrepreneur in South Africa, and at the dining room table a year before I graduated, said, "What do you want to do?" And I told him a psychologist, and he laughed. He laughed at me. He said, "You have zero ability in that area." And when you're 20 years old, you don't want to hear that, right?
You don't hear that about anything.
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
So he would say to me, you got to come and you got to get into business, and I think you've got an entrepreneurial streak. He hired me after I graduated from university, and he had a number of different businesses, and he sent me to Johannesburg, and he put me in one of his industrial manufacturing companies.
Okay.
A 3M equivalent. It was called Cello Tape.
Okay.
And they sold 500 different types of tape, industrial tape, tape that, the stuff that you sticky tape, all different types of tape, sealers. And I was in their management training program. So, my first job was counting stock in a warehouse, doing all of that, the grunt work. That was 2 months. And then 2 months on the factory floor. I had to open the factory at 4:00 every morning and make breakfast for the factory manager and his assistant.
What was breakfast?
Bacon and egg.
Come on.
Greasy. Sausages.
Come on.
I mean, these guys had that every morning.
All right.
They taught me how to do it in a little, 3-top burner. Crazy. And then I went into the industrial sales area, where I was required. I wasn't, getting commissions or anything like that, but they had a filing cabinet, no computers, and it was defunct accounts was the filing cabinet name, A to Z, start at the top. I had to take out the card, verify that the company was still in existence, who was the buyer. If the buyer didn't know the buyer, get in the car, go to the factory, find the person's name. And the goal was see if you could, the game was, see if you can resuscitate some clients.
Yeah.
So I had the benefit of speaking Afrikaans, which was, one of the languages in South Africa, like Dutch. And I paid a sales call to a very large farming cooperative. And the guy that was the buyer was only 4 or 5 years older than me. And we had, he was Afrikaans speaking. He was sort of clean-cut guy. I knew he'd been in the military. And we just connected instantaneously. And he said, "Your timing is really bad. I've just put in all my purchase orders for a 3-year purchase of tape." But he said, "I've got 3 products which I think I'm being hosed on in terms of pricing. I think I can do better. If you can come to the table with a really good price, but you've got a week." So I literally ran back to the factory, sat down with the sales manager and the accountant and said, "Listen, and the numbers were huge. It was 20,000 of that and 50,000 of that and 100,000 of that, masking tapes and a whole bunch of different things." So they gave me a set of prices. I went back to him, and his eyes sort of, they literally went big as saucers. And he said, "These are fantastic prices. I'm going to give you a purchase order. And if you can get these delivered," I think it was in a month time frame, "you've got the order, but you have to guarantee delivery." So a lot of our competitors, would have to purchase. We were a manufacturer, and so we had the stock. So I got it, and it was like $40,000. And I don't think anybody, a trainee had that. It was, in many ways, it was a combination of just do do the work,
Show up.
and then some luck, and then
right.
the ability to connect and build a relationship. So
But if you don't show up, you don't know if fate's on the other side of that. Or
right.
not.
So from there, Robert Maingard, who owned the business, French Mauritian, he pulled me back down to his head office, which was where I lived in Durban, and he put me into another business, which was industrial chemicals, and I spent a year and a half there, and really learning the ropes. So his thing was, I'm gonna put you in these positions where you got to cut your teeth and you got to earn your stripes. So there was no preferential treatment, even though I knew the family, and his son was, all his kids were really good friends of mine. He was pretty ruthless.
Yeah, you were going to learn the business.
Yeah.
And so you did that for 3-ish years.
3-ish years.
And then what was the catalyst to move to Canada?
So South Africa was going through a really tough time. Apartheid was still really, strong. This was 1989, 1990. I thought there was probably going to be a civil war in South Africa. There was a lot of violence. The ANC were coming in, Mandela's African National Congress. There were mines going off. There were, it was just a tough time. I was also going back into the military. So I'd go for 3 months. Robert would pay the difference between my military salary and my work salary. And I just felt that there probably wasn't a future for me. That was in the back of my mind.
Yeah.
But I also had this wanderlust. It was really interesting, and I've said this to some people. In many ways, my life was going to be a laydown.
Yeah.
Both my parents were successful.
Yep.
I traveled in really good circles, had great friends, had been very privileged. And, my path in a way was laid out.
Yep.
But there was something in me that said, I've got to do something on my own.
Yep.
If I'm truly going to look myself in the eye and feel that I'm competent, whatever it is, right?
You wanted a challenge.
I wanted a challenge.
100%.
And so I spoke to my parents and spoke to Robert, and I said, listen, I think I'm going to immigrate. I didn't know where I was going to go. I had fallen in love with the United States. I had visited here in 1978 when Ronald Reagan was it 79? No, it was 1980. It was 1980. My dad had come to the U.S. He had started an office furniture manufacturing business in California. And my sister, brother, and I had come out to visit for a vacation. Reagan was president. It was during the time of the Polish uprising. Do you remember Lech Walesa, the famous Polish union worker? Anyway, legendary guy. And Reagan was supporting the Poles against communism, and it was amazing. And he asked everybody one night, we were in Laguna Beach, and he came on TV and he said, listen, the whole country, this time of night, like 8 o'clock when it got dark in California, we're going to go outside. You all light a candle, hold hands, and we're in solidarity with Walesa. South Africa was apartheid-driven. Everything was censored. It was a one-party state. I mean, there was another party, but it was just window dressing. I'd never seen anything like it in my entire life.
Yep.
And there was a vibrancy in the United States. There was this entrepreneurial spirit, and it was very diverse. Growing up, I mean, we were in a very small, isolated, both in terms of ethnicity, etc. And I was very, very keen on the United States, but I couldn't get in. It was difficult to get a green card. But Canada had this amazing program where, if you had a university degree, there was a point system. If you had a good, clean record, you could apply. And then if you met the qualifications, so I applied. And, a couple of months later, I got a note in the mail saying, come to Pretoria for an interview. And then, a couple of weeks later, I got a green card. And I had 4 months to get there. So I ended up going to Canada, which was the next best thing, to the US. And I love Canada. No knock on Canada. By the way, I love Canada. And it was the most welcoming, extraordinary experience. And then en route, the Canadian said, you've got to find a job in order to have your green card within X amount of period of time. Otherwise, you've got to go back home. And I had a couple of entrepreneur organization friends in Vancouver, Canada, who said, listen, come and maybe, we'll hire you temporarily as a salesperson on commission. And that didn't really get me going. But I had been trained, when I worked for Robert, I had been trained to interpret these selection tests as part of my managerial training. They taught you how to hire, do recruitment and selection.
Okay, yeah.
And one of the things that I learned to do was score up a basic behavioral analysis. And there was a famous test called Wonderlic, which would say whether you could add 1 + 1 and that type of thing. So I approached the owners of the tests, who happened to be in the UK. I spent a week on my way to Canada with the owners and convinced them to give me the rights for Canada.
No way.
They gave me one city to begin with.
Yep.
And they said, if you can make it work, we'll think about giving you
Yep.
a broader territory. So my first year I sold $200,000 worth of tests. They hadn't sold $200,000 in 5 years.
Wow.
And that's what got me going. So I ended up owning all of Canada, the Canadian territory, and then the United States and Mexico.
Didn't they used to give that test to NFL rookies?
To a lot of people.
Yeah.
they gave it.
But I feel like that's where maybe I heard it popularized.
It's a big industry today.
Yeah,
So, the testing industry.
It's huge.
This was one of the early, this was a UK company
Yeah.
called Thomas, which had a fantastic suite of tests. Their biggest seller was the disc test, which is
Yeah, of
famous.
course, yeah.
I sold over $2 million a year worth of disc, just one test.
Wow.
And then I did training and development. I had a number of different, and I started an executive search firm as well. So I had 3 legs to that stool.
Okay. Yep.
14 years. And during that time, what I loved about that business was I got to see the inside of, when I sold that business, I had over 2,000 individual companies.
Yeah.
And so I got to see the inside of so many different businesses and also understand, the power of understanding personality and behavior. And because we all show up with a certain set of tools, our toolkit. Very importantly, understanding what your drivers are and what your innate behavioral preferences are. It gives you an opportunity to stream yourself in an area that you're good at, but it also gives you an opportunity to see where everybody else fits in. So that you're not, if you've got too many, in the DISC terminology, uber high dominant individuals, it's going to be a train wreck.
Yeah.
You've got to have people that are
mix and the
detailed,
diversity,
mix
the
and the diversity.
personalities.
Great experience. So
So those 2,000 companies too, Sean, you're generally dealing with whom at that organization?
Generally, I would start with the CEO or the COO, start at the top.
And most of those are CEO owner as well.
CEO
probably.
owner, a lot of them.
Yeah.
My model initially was I went for the big company. I went for the Fortune 50 and 500 because they could pay their bills and they could drive volume.
Correct. Right. You
And
could
then-
take 100 tests or 500 tests. Yeah.
And then as the business grew, so we went to the small to medium-sized
makes sense.
market. But then my main client ended up being the chief human resource officer because they would be the deliverer, the keeper. Yeah, they would drive And then I made I would say probably had a very successful eggs, and then I made a cardinal error. And not going in, I went into a totally different business, 180 degrees. I went to financing of low-income housing in Mexico.
Okay.
My wife had grown up in Mexico.
Okay.
And I got
Where did y'all meet?
We met at a entrepreneurs organization university in Chicago in 1997. She was the founder of EO in Mexico City.
No way.
And
This is
founded
Maria.
Yes. And Maria founded a number, maybe 10 or 12 chapters for EO. Was the first woman chairman of EO globally in 2000.
Very cool.
But we met, became friends, and we served on the board of EO together.
Okay.
We started dating, actually we met in 95, started dating in 97. We got married in 99. So we got to know each other really well.
Yep, absolutely.
And so that's how I ended up in Mexico. Back to our earlier conversation.
Sure Maria was the right life partner.
I ended up partnering up with a phenomenal guy who had been a very senior executive within Citibank, ended up being the CEO of one of their major global divisions. He lives in Fort Worth now. He taught me about finance like nobody did because I was self-trained in business. I didn't go to business school or anything like that. But Don Oswald was just the most incredible mentor. He'd been a CFO for most of his life, then a CEO.
If Don was here right now, what's top 1 or 2 things Don would say about finance?
It's all about the detail. It's the little things matter in finance and just making sure that everything is ticked and tied. And then, making sure that you've got people that can look at a balance sheet or look at an income statement and look for the anomalies and truly, truly be not confrontational, but push in terms of making sure that you've got, you've got all of that lined out. The other most important thing in finance is the relationship with your banker or your capital provider. It could be, it could be an angel investor. It could be an investor group. It could be the bank itself. Without that relationship, when things get tough, you're going to be in a really, really hard road. They've got to know you. They've got to understand your passion, understand your goals, and what the future of your business plan looks like. And you've got to enroll them in the mutual success that you're both going to have if we play well together. And then the final one is transparency. You do not hide bad news in the financial world. If you do, you're dead. You can get away with it maybe once or twice, and then the corollary to that is little things like pay your taxes and don't cheat. And also as a founder entrepreneur, if you can right from the beginning separate your personal from the business, keep them very distinct. I always say to entrepreneurs, particularly when they start to make money, pay yourself the market rate and you will prevent yourself from cheating. If you are not paying yourself a market rate, say you're the CEO and the market rate for a finance business is $350K a year, and you're paying yourself $150, and then you're leaking things through the business to pay for your car or your house or your housekeeper. That is the dumbest thing that you can do, particularly when you come to sell your company one day. If you're running a lifestyle business and it's legal and above board, fine. But it's so critical to manage your personal affairs as well as your business affairs. And that's something that entrepreneurs find hard to do sometimes. And that's a big wake-up call.
It's great counsel. Great counsel.
And also, you want to, if you decide not to sell your business, or none of us have a crystal ball. None of us know what's going to happen tomorrow. So this business Don and I did together, we had a fantastic run, but we were whipsawed by the financial crisis in 2008.
Yep.
We had just bought a piece of land in Tampico, Mexico for $10 million, loaned to us by a very well-known local real estate investor. We'd had a great run, but our lender pulled our line within 2 weeks of the market crash. 2 weeks, the business.
Wow.
Now, it took us about 15 months to wind down. We did an amazing job, no lawsuits or anything like that. But it was, the lesson in that for me was not that the business model was bad, was that we didn't have a rainy day for a big calamitous black swan event like the 2008 collapse. And I'm not saying every business owner should have, a massive crisis plan, but you've got to have a plan B and a plan C. Keep rainy day money. Recognize the business that you're in. Keep very much abreast of what's happening in your industry, what's happening in the markets, the global financial markets. Again, I've been very privileged both at EO and YPO to work with, CEOs and companies around the world. I mean, literally, YPO's in 128 countries. I think I visited 100 of them.
Incredible.
Over a 30-year period. I've just done in the last 6 months 2 round-the-world trips, and I start another one on Saturday. I spend 2 weeks in Dubai, and I'll be a week in Singapore. And I share that with you not because it's glamorous, because the reality is there's not a lot of difference between a CEO, entrepreneur, founder in Singapore to Dallas, Texas, to Cape Town, South Africa. Similar problems. Fundamentally, the issues are not that dissimilar. They have very similar, personalities, life experiences. And so when you see that, I realized very early on in my life, I think from my first overseas trip, to the US, was that we are not a disconnected planet. We are so intricately linked.
Yep.
And if you're a spiritual person, one of my values is spirituality. And if you're a spiritual person and you've been through this journey, we're all connected.
Yep.
Doug, you and I are connected.
Yep.
We don't know quite where those bonds are, but I guarantee you, we spend authentic quality time together, we'll find them. Scott and I. we have those intersecting things. And I've started to think more about that in the latter part of my career than I did in the early part of my career. I think if I had been schooled, or I had had the opportunity to maybe be mentored or to be part of EO was a lifesaver for me, and a major pivotal point in my life where I could get together with a forum group every month, for 4 hours, totally confidentially, and that was brilliant. But my wish for every CEO or leader is that they learn just how powerful that the interconnectedness is that we all share. Not in an apple pie fashion, but in a true connection fashion. Are you following?
I am, but I want to ask you pragmatically, Sean, why do you believe that connection is so important? As a CEO, as a leader, as a person, why does understanding, having that perspective, how does that influence my day-to-day, my life, my career? How's it?
So my
impact me?
experience is because people will follow you even in tough times. People will give you a break. People will go the extra mile. If you invest, just try and invest 2x what you're investing in one-on-one time, and not with the people that you're spending time with in the C-suite. Go and spend time with somebody on the shop floor. Go and spend time. Go and take somebody for a pizza, or go and volunteer with them in this. You'll see a side to them, which gives you a sense of, they have their lives, they have their difficulties, and it changed the way I interacted with people. When I started to have a big team, I always had small teams. I had small to medium-sized businesses. When I went in, to help run YPO, and we had 500 employees, and I had 9 direct reports, and I had 8 board members, that I was responsible to and talking to. That requires a different level of relationship, and it's very difficult to do that inauthentically. You can't mail that in.
No, you can't.
It's not a check the box exercise.
Well, in that particular leadership role too, you're a leader of leaders, right?
You're a leader of leaders.
And so, you have to really be on your game. Not that not leading leaders is easier. It's still challenging, but like you're working with the most competitive people in the business world around the world, right? So
you are. And you're dealing with cultural differences.
Yeah.
You're dealing with wealth differences.
Yeah.
You're dealing with expectation differences.
Yeah.
How do I know, if I'm going to have an effective relationship with you, if I don't understand what the expectations are? And on both sides of the equation, it could be as simple as, I always like to be on time. I like to work with people that, finish and follow through and do what they say they're going to do. Now, on the flip side of that, I get triggered when somebody doesn't do what they say they're going to do. And then I've learned not to fly off the handle.
That's right.
To breathe 3 times.
Yeah.
But that took, I don't know, maybe 10 years to learn that skill. And, I also got into the habit of, there's this MBO, right? Management by walking around was a big thing back in the day. I still think that is highly relevant. And it's not, you go and you tell somebody what to do. You go and you find time to connect with them.
And listen.
And
Ask
listen.
a question.
Also modeling behavior. Today, particularly in the last 3 years, with young people coming into the workforce, when you're not in the office, how do they see good versus bad behavior?
Yeah. How
do they start to discern what the kinds of attributes, behaviors, habits are that are going to make them successful in life?
Yeah.
Ultimately, they're a choice. They're going to decide how they do it, but we need to show up as examples.
Sean, I couldn't believe more. We've said it here before. One of my favorite phrases in life is caught, not taught. So I love the fact that you use the word modeling.
Yes.
Because people, they don't really listen to what we say. They watch what we actually do.
Watch what we do.
How long did you lead YPO?
Well, I was there for just over 7.5 years.
Okay.
I've been a member for over 16 years now. So I joined at the beginning of 2013. Then I wrapped up, my role midway through 2020.
Okay.
And then I sort of hung my shingle up. It was a very demanding role.
Yeah, I bet.
I was blessed, by the way, with an incredible CEO in Scott Mordell. He'd been there 2 years, 3 years before me. And he recruited me into the organization sort of as two in a box, if you know that. Too big and complex an organization to have one CEO 100% responsible for it. In the YPO context, it's a $350 to $400 million a year business with your client, 35,000 CEOs as your client. We had 16 departments, from events to networks to all of the standard operational things. So Scott and I divided and conquered. He had the board, he had finance, he had marketing. I had all of the member facing. So I had more than 2/3 of the P&L.
Yep.
But we would get together once a month in person for a day.
Yep.
And this is where I think anybody that looking at delegation, or who do you partner with, you and Mark, for example, a great example is know your strengths and weaknesses, but you've got to get clear on that very early, particularly in the EOS construct where you've got a visionary and an integrator. So Scott and I, the first time we sat down was like, a month into my role, I said, get the lay of the land. And I'd been a member for a long time, and I thought I knew the organization.
Yeah.
And I've been a very active volunteer.
Right.
Oh, when you see the sausage getting made,
It's
totally.
always different.
It's always different, right?
always
It's
different.
always different. So flew up to Chicago. We took a room we would take a room at the same hotel at O'Hare. And we started out, it was really interesting. He said to me, Sean, research, go out and find an article that represents what you think a good number two role, number two, number one relationship. I'm going to do the same. We're not going to share them in advance. And we're going to come to the meeting and we're going to share with each other. We're going to go through a whole list of things. This was his idea, which is brilliant, by the way. And we're going to go through what my likes and dislikes are, what my expectations are. You're going to do the exact same back to me. Not wrong or right.
That's right.
This is equals.
Raw. Yeah, exactly.
We're now, we're now in that conversation. So I had found kind of a religious document. It was called Leading from the Second Chair. And it was brilliant. I had searched high and low. I'd reached out to a couple of my friends and, to my friend Rand Stegan. I hadn't come up with anything that quite sort of captured it. And, it's like in the biblical terms, Joseph, right? So when you lead from the second chair, you're still a leader. You still have tremendous responsibility. But there's a part of it that you have to be comfortable, ego-wise, with not being the top dog.
Yes.
Even though you're making equivalent decisions, you've got the respect, you've got the compensation, you've got all of those
different.
things.
It's not less.
It's like with me and my wife, right?
Yes.
Leading from the second chair.
Let's be clear, Maria has the first chair.
That is the first chair. So, that was profound. And so eventually we got down to a quarter because we got really good.
Yeah.
Because our check-ins were very powerful.
Yep.
And we would both check in. And what ended up happening started out being, we spoke initially about, the emotional side, the job responsibility side. So that kind of created the framework for the relationship. But then what ended up happening was there was such a high degree of trust. There was no gray. We committed to each other. And this is very important, particularly for your C-suite. If you can develop relationships where there's no gray, where nobody's hiding the ball, where nobody has an agenda that, because you can start to smell it. If you start out with a commitment to having no light, no gray, no chink in that armor, now, you also have to be really clear that if something comes up where you disagree with that person, or the person does something egregious, say they put the company at risk, or they do something really inappropriate, sort of maybe they're abusive towards a team member, or, they go out one night and get totally trashed and come to work and drunk to a board meeting. I mean, life happens, right? As long as there were certain behaviors that if they occurred, then you're on your own. I'm going to do the right thing.
Yep.
I'm going to do on both sides. When that's in place and you start to live that, what happens is people just come towards you. They don't shy away from that. They go, wow, that's special. And we built a team. I would say I'd put our team up against it. We built over a 10-year period that I would put up against everybody. They may not necessarily have been the best they were the best we could afford, but they ended up being so productive because of this culture of trust, openness, communication, every Tuesday we'd have a C-suite call. What are your threes for the week? What are the issues that we can help you with? And then each of us had an individual one-on-one. That system and the way we showed up, and then we would, at least once a quarter, we'd get together in person for 2 days as a senior executive team. You know, some work and some play.
And some get to know.
And some get to know and some fun. And just also being people, recognizing that you bring everything in your life to the table. You bring the good in your life, you bring the health issues in your life, you bring the family issues. And that was something that I'm so proud of, you know, that it gave me a practical realization of what can be accomplished when you have all those elements come together. And it wasn't perfect, but when you've got the essence, it works like magic and you can pivot more quickly.
There's trust, there's teamwork, there's collaboration. All right, in the last couple of minutes, Sean, one of our favorite things to do here at Decision Points, and again, I think you just said at YPO at that point, 35,000 CEOs, members. Sean, you've got 2-3 minutes. There's a room full of 100 CEOs. Coach us. What's the elevator pitch to those CEOs? Start doing this, stop doing this.
What do they need to know that they're unaware of? Like that they're just like, they're kind of doing their day-to-day, doing their thing, and they're unaware of, like, there's some bigger things out here you need to be thinking about, but you're so in it.
That you can't see the wood for the trees, maybe?
Yeah, what is that thing, or a couple things?
So a couple of things. You know, if you are not clear on your own personal values, and that you've articulated those values to the team, they may not align 100% with the corporate values. I'm a huge stickler for developing corporate values and doing it with a group of people that are instrumental and then testing it against the rank and file of a company. But your own North Star, if I ask 3 or 4 people that work with you what your core values are, what would they say? So know yourself. CEOs need to know themselves. And we spoke about it earlier with the sort of founder trap, where you hit that, you hit that window and you know, it's not good. Know yourself. And the responsibility of knowing yourself is also understanding what is the impact, what are the impacts of the behaviors that may not necessarily be viewed positively by other people. And how can I mitigate for those? So that's the big one. Know yourself first, get that feedback, and then articulate your values. I do my values every year, and I have a very simple 1-page formula. I have 5 values, and then what does that look like in action? I review that every year. In fact, I actually have it on my desk from time to time because it anchors me in a reminder. We get so busy, we get so tied up in the minutia or in the pursuit of success or whatever it may be that we often forget how important it is to live according to those values. People that don't forget are the people that see you in action.
That's right.
That's right.
Right? So that's number 1. Number 2, planning and preparation. You know, I know a lot of successful entrepreneurs that wing it.
Yeah.
That gets you so far. You can't build a team or a solid organization that's sustainable and that's sellable if you don't have everything locked and loaded.
That's a powerful phrase too. Sellable and sustainable.
You know, a lot of companies go to market and they're really good in a particular area. They've got the EBITDA number, they've got a good C-suite, they've got a pipeline and projection. But then you ask them, what is your 3-year plan? What are your competitors doing? Are there things in your organization that are incredibly valuable that could juice your return that you don't even think are valuable? What IP exists in your business? So when I look at companies, when I work with CEOs, is the best companies are the ones that have kind of taken a step back, looked at the entire organization within their industry and said, how do we measure up against against the best-in-class benchmarks in our industry? You guys do that, and then where can we go from there? Are we staying number 1? And you don't have to be number 1, but are we constantly measuring ourselves? And then if we are measuring ourselves, what are we doing about making sure that we, shore up the weaknesses? And then constantly don't leave your business plan or I call it your enterprise value playbook on the shelf. That needs to drive you. You need to look at that every month. So that's critical in terms of, for me, enabling both personal and business success. So those are a couple.
What I love about this conversation today, and we haven't had to ask a lot of questions because Sean just it just kind of rolls off. But it's because of your experience that it rolls off. But we didn't talk about this ahead of time, but we have these sort of 4 things that we think are critical for a business owner, entrepreneur to exit well, right? And one of them is around this idea of coaching, which we hit very early on in the conversation. And coaching can be that hitting the ceiling of complexity and delegate and elevate and unique ability. And, what are you going to do with your time post-exit, and what are your values? And then there's, this sort of wealth planning piece, which is getting your house in order, which, we didn't spend a lot of time there, but you touched on it a little bit with, when you exit and you have these proceeds, how do you manage them? And what's the next turn look like? And then we talked a little bit about EOS and having your C-suite healthy and a good team and core values and all of that kind of stuff to make the business just the best that it can be. And then we've touched on valuation a bit and how to maximize valuation with not having your personal finances, your country club membership and your car and all the stuff running through the business, and then not putting the valuation playbook on the shelf, right here at the end. And so what I love about our conversation is that Sean has literally hit each of the 4 pillars just as the natural flow in the conversation. So thank you. No, it's been amazing.
The last point I will make is on succession, because part of that playbook, for a successful exit and then your wealth preservation is making sure that you've got a team that if you decide that you're no longer, you may decide, I don't want to be the chairman of the business. I want to go and do something else. I want to go and do philanthropy. And that's something that, a lot of successful CEOs don't think about the next stage of their life soon enough, is spend as much time as you can building your bench, giving people an opportunity to show that they could step into your shoes and your CFO's shoes and your chief marketing officer's shoes. Build your bench and constantly think about, if I, God forbid, drop dead tomorrow,
that's right,
who's going to step in? And I see so many companies that have no succession. The founder has to come back into the business. It ends up being a disaster. And one of the things a good banker, a good M&A banker is going to drill you on.
100%.
What is the composition of your team? What is succession? Who can come in tomorrow? From the inside, not from the outside, because we can always hire from the outside, but inside needs to be as rock solid as it possibly can be.
It's incredible. Sean, thank you.
Doug,
thank you for making time. If you've watched or listened to invest, I landed with this, and Sean coached me up. Thank you for know yourself, know your values, preparation and planning, and I'm going to add a third that you just build your bench. John, thank you.